Gentle parenting is for gentle children. My child is a raccoon with rabies.
Swear to God, this concept of gentle parenting ruined my relationship with my son.
Y'all see that bite mark, right? Yeah, that was my daughter biting my son. Ask me if I handled that how a gentle parent is supposed to handle it. I didn't. I lost my shit. Because how are you supposed to keep your composure when your children get hurt?
Hello, my dears. So it appears millennials are finally ditching gentle parenting.
So, you might know the phrase F around and find out, meaning if you step out of line, Godspeed. Because now millennials, some of whom feel defeated by so-called gentle parenting, are turning to this old school, no-nonsense approach of our parents and grandparents. Here's how the Wall Street Journal described it. Didn't feel like having lasagna for dinner? Survive until breakfast. Left your toy on the floor again? Go find it in the trash under that lasagna you didn't eat.
To be honest, I'm not really surprised because while well-intentioned, gentle parenting looked emotionally, physically, spiritually exhausting. It is also kind of crazy that it has convinced some mothers that raising their voice is always inherently bad, regardless of context.
Y'all see that bite mark, right? Yeah, that was my daughter biting my son. Ask me if I handled that how a gentle parent is supposed to handle it. I didn't. I lost my shit. Because how are you supposed to keep your composure when your children get hurt? Did I bite her back? No. Did I want to? Oh, you bet your ass. You bet your ass I wanted to bite her back. Yeah, I know it's developmentally appropriate. I know that these are things that are going to happen, but it doesn't take away the fact that it feels so defeating when you pour every ounce of energy you have into regulating your own emotions so that you can gentle parent, for things to still happen like this and for you to still lose your cool, because that's being human. I literally caught her doing it and I just fucking screamed, dude. I screamed at the top of my lungs for her to stop biting him, which obviously as a 2.5-year-old, that's gonna scare the shit out of you. Your mom's screaming at you, but what was I supposed to do? I wasn't within arm's reach of them. I can't be within arm's reach of them every second of every day. I couldn't get there fast enough to physically remove her. I yelled. I fucking yelled. And then as you can imagine, we all started crying.
When personally, I think it really does depend on the context and also depends on more of what you're saying. I personally think that what you're saying is more important than necessarily the volume of your voice, because raising your voice often just communicates urgency. It's like if your friend was walking into the road and they were about to get hit by a bus. You're more likely to scream for them to look out, and in doing so, you potentially save their lives, because when you raise your voice, it communicates urgency, it gets someone's attention quickly, and sometimes you need that in situations like this, where you need someone to hear you quickly and react quickly to what you're saying. So no, I don't think raising your voice is always inherently bad. Now, if you're swearing at your child, or you're saying you're using very vile language towards them, then that's very different. Because obviously the problem there is not just the raised voice, but it's also the fact that you're also using abusive language. But this idea that just simply raising your voice is always bad all the time and inherently abusive or inherently bad, I just think is a bit overkill. But it is really interesting to me that gentle parenting has some mothers so convinced that raising your voice is always inherently bad, to the point where when they're put in a situation where they need to raise their voice, because it's a desperate situation like this one where a child is harming another child, they can't help but feel guilty about it and feel so distressed by the fact that they've done it, to the point where now they're crying with the child. But because some people who do practice gentle parenting do hold the view that you should never raise your voice and you should never really tell off your child in the way that could be interpreted as intimidating or aggressive, some of them find themselves in these kinds of situations.
Throw that book at me again, I'll be really upset. That hurt my head. So you're throwing it that, well, it's fine. But that hurts Mummy's head. You wouldn't do it to Daddy, so don't do it to me, please, okay? And slapping me after, that wasn't nice either. No. Look at me. Look at me. No.
Yes, they find themselves trying very hard to desperately negotiate with little terrorizers. And it is because of all of this that some people have now developed a very negative view of gentle parenting. And you find a lot of people judging people who try to practice it because they think that it creates children who are very bratty, spoiled, and just poorly behaved.
I'll probably get a lot of hate for this, but I actually can't stand this whole like gentle parenting when you're out in public. And I understand, like, we all do it to a certain extent. Like, we would never like really shout at our kids when we're out and about and we're in a public place, you might be like, just do it now, under like gritted teeth. But this whole like, when your kid is being really naughty, and the whole like gentle parenting thing of like, oh, don't do that. How do you think that makes that person feel? Your kid is hitting someone, tell them off and pull them away. Like, it's just too much. And I've just like witnessed a child being not like naughty, but like quite cheeky, where you could see it going in the wrong direction. And the mum was just so gentle, and I didn't look at her and think like, oh, you're so caring. I looked at her and was like, you're a wet flannel. Tell me I'm wrong.
And so as a result of that, you find people very much often on social media judging people who practice gentle parenting because they view it as a very, very soft approach, which isn't very effective. And parents who've been practicing gentle parenting themselves have also noticed that sometimes it has created very negative behavior traits in their own children. Like this mum, for example, on Reddit, who posted, "Gentle parenting turned my child into an a-hole. I had my firstborn child almost 5 years ago. From before I gave birth, I was deep in gentle parenting content, diligently researching the most up-to-date theories and strategies around discipline and emotional development. I was enthusiastic to apply a better parenting method than my parents had with me. Over the years, there have been frustrations and triumphs with my child's behaviour, but in the last 12 months or so, their behaviour has been taking a steady downturn. Meltdowns started becoming the norm, and they began escalating destructive behaviours when they didn't get their way. I tried to follow all the scripts and advice about being firm but kind, letting them feel their emotions, and trying to always talk about how we could do better next time once they calmed down. Nothing worked. Last week, I finally snapped when yet again my child screamed and threw their food at dinner time because, in their words, it's disgusting. Mind you, I had specifically made a dinner composed of food they had eaten and told me they liked. I yelled at them that I was sick of their attitude and that I didn't care if they ate or not, but there would be nothing else and certainly no snacks or sugar. My husband didn't yell, but agreed that something had to change because our child is getting more and more bratty. Since then, we have removed all privileges, including screens, sugar, snacks, and some of the toys that my mother had gotten them. All of these had previously been allowed in moderation, but every time we enforced the boundaries we have communicated for years, i.e., okay, that's 20 minutes of iPad, let's put it away now, like we talked about, my child would become irate and aggressive. We started to see quite the turnaround in their behaviour, with them starting to actually apologise for their rude behaviours after they calmed down, or for the most part managing to keep a relatively level head around the rules we were enforcing. It's been an adjustment, and they accuse me of being a rude mummy. I'm sorry, that's kind of cute. I know it's not good, but it's kind of cute. Because since the day I blew up, my tolerance for the carrying on is non-existent, and I have been very stern with them. But their behaviour is improving, so despite feeling like a witch with a bee, I'm starting to think that gentle parenting is a crock of shit, and I should have been more authoritarian from the start. I keep crying to my husband and telling him I feel I am damaging my child, but he says that they are just adjusting to the new normal. I guess I'm just after reassurance that I'm not making a mistake. Gentle parenting is always an interesting one for me because, like she said in her post, she wanted to take a different approach to that of her parents. She saw issues in their method of raising her, and so she's been drawn to gentle parenting because she wanted to do something completely different and wanted to go in a different direction, which is fair enough. However, I do find that it's really interesting that with gentle parenting, a lot of the time the parents who adopt it are very, very hyper-conscious of the harms of being too strict or being too hard on their children, but they don't really seem to consider as much the potential consequences of being too gentle or too late or too permissive, because I do think that there is also two sides of this, right? You can definitely go wrong by being too much in either direction. I do think if they considered the fact that there are consequences for being too permissive, then they probably wouldn't feel as guilty when they try to set boundaries or try to enforce rules or try to enforce structure. Because if you understand that there is going to be a consequence of your child not having that, then you wouldn't feel so guilty about it when you're doing it because you know you're doing it for the greater good. I understand that it might cause your child to have a negative reaction to you, and of course parents probably that's what they're reacting to, maybe that's what's causing them to feel guilty and distressed, but I do do think that if you know ultimately that this is going to be for the benefit of your child down the line, I just wonder if they would still feel as guilty about it if they viewed it like that, you know? It's just interesting how different the generations are. You know, nowadays people are so worried about being too tough on their children, and they want to try and make their children's life as simple and as easy as possible. Whereas back in the day, the way that people used to approach parenting was, if you don't discipline your child, the world is going to. So they had no issue with being quite stern and quite firm when it came to their parenting methods, because they understood that if they didn't do it, then they were gonna their child was probably going to experience much harsher consequences in the outside world if these behaviors weren't corrected. So I guess I find it really fascinating to see how both parents are motivated by the same desire, which is that they want to have a well-adjusted, healthy child, but their approaches are completely the opposite. And that's what's just so interesting about it. I do also think that this woman's post also touches on a big part of why so many millennials in particular are so drawn to gentle parenting, which is, as I mentioned before, there's this strong desire that they have to, quote, not traumatize their children, or to correct the wrongs that they feel their parents had made with them.
For many parents, says this family therapist, raising their children this way felt like a pushback against the more authoritative way they were brought up.
Millennials are realizing that there was an emphasis on being seen and not heard, maybe in their upbringing, and so they're hoping to change that a little bit. There's a lot of self-reflection.
It's something Toronto mother Chelsea Strawn found firsthand when she had her daughter Hazel 2 years ago.
Women are in their most vulnerable state as they're starting to become parents, and especially with the constant thought of not wanting to mess up our kids. So I think it's very overwhelming, and I think it's really hard to weed out what's right for you.
And I think because millennials have had more access to psychologists and podcasts and books, parenting books and all these different things, I think millennials have had so much information that it's just inevitably they've tried to take on the role of being a parent as well as a therapist. And that's just kind of how it seems to me. They're trying so desperately to not mess up their children, and I think that's a big driving force behind so many of them adopting gentle parenting, because they don't want to mess up their children, and they also want to correct the mistakes they feel their parents made with them through their children. I've seen some people say that because millennials have information overload, or any young parent nowadays, to be fair, or obviously right now we're talking about millennials, but generally young parents as a whole, because there's so much information overload, it's a lot easier for them to ignore their instincts, because if you're getting so much information and some of it is contradictory, you might not know or might not feel as though you know how to correctly do this whole parenting thing, especially if you also have this internal anxiety that you might potentially mess up your child, and that's the one thing you're trying so desperately to not allow to happen. Then of course it makes sense that you would seek external sources for how is the best way to raise them and how is the best way to go about the parenting, about your parenting structure. And so gentle parenting just happens to pop up because it's quite a popular concept, you know, it's all over social media. A lot of people have heard of gentle parenting, and so it's fairly well advertised, I guess you could say. And so it makes sense that a lot of them would be drawn to it. But I have heard some people say that they think that gentle parenting is actually a form of an overcorrection, and many of the people who try to enforce it are trying to overcorrect.
Why do you think that is? This kind of mass pushback against the tenets of gentle parenting, saying this is not working, it's not sustainable.
I mean, I would agree. I mean, I think there's been this overcorrection, and that's why I think it's so important for people to understand, at least where I stand, whether you believe in it or not, or want more information or not, I at least want to be classified correctly. There has been this overcorrection from punishing our kid, in which situation it's like, I'm the authority. I happen to be a kind of authoritarian authority. It's not even effective, but I'm an authoritarian authority and I send my kids away. Okay. And there's been this overcorrection to my kids' feelings. Not only do they matter, they now dictate what I do. I actually think this overcorrection has led to, as parents, we've like relegated our jobs to our kids. We're letting them pilot the plane.
So ultimately, the top reasons why people are starting to give up on gentle parenting include they find it emotionally draining because it requires constant calm and self-regulation, which is hard under stress. Social pressure is also a big one because family and friends may criticize it and accuse it of being too soft. Results can also be slow because it's focused on long-term growth, not quick obedience. So this can sometimes be very frustrating. Parental burnout is also a huge issue when it comes to gentle parenting. Unrealistic expectations can lead to guilt, exhaustion, which is something that some family therapists have also noticed as well.
Well-meaning though it may be, parenting where you're always trying to be gentle, always understanding of the child's feelings, never raising your voice, has its price.
There's a degree of burnout in parenting culture right now. People are tired and they're feeling inadequate. A part of it, I think, is a bit of a misunderstanding of gentle parenting, this idea that it's permissive, it's incredibly child-centric, and so it just removes the humanity from the parent. There's no room for you to be flawed or to not do it perfectly.
That burnout has even been noted in a report by the U.S. Surgeon General, where Dr. Vivek Murthy calls modern parenting a significant public health issue. The report zeroes in on concrete sources of stress, like increased economic pressures and little childcare support in the U.S. But there are other stressors as well. It says guilt and shame have become pervasive, and societal expectations, norms, and pressures to meet perceived standards of parenting can contribute to stress as well.
And another reason as well why some parents are just giving up on gentle parenting is because they think there's just a lack of practical tools available, which makes it really hard for some people to apply it because they don't feel like they have clear guidance or clear strategies. And so all of this is why some parents are now turning their back on gentle parenting and adopting slightly more traditional ways of parenting with some adjustments. I think for most of the parents who did gentle parenting and are now completely leaving it behind, I think they probably will keep some elements of gentle parenting that they learned, but they are resorting to a bit more of a sterner form of parenting, one that is a bit heavier on boundaries, what some would have called authoritative parenting. But yeah, they're basically setting more boundaries, being a bit more firm, but still trying to incorporate that understanding and, you know, kindness towards their child and not being super authoritarian. What I do find really interesting though is that there are some really pro gentle parenting advocates who, anytime they see a gentle parenting parent quit gentle parenting, they always, I don't know, it's kind of interesting because they'll always say that gentle parenting itself is fine. You were just doing it wrong, basically.
Gentle parenting is for gentle children. My child is a raccoon with rabies.
If you're not authoritative parenting, you only have two other options: authoritarian, threats, bribes, yelling, smacks, or permissive, where you let the kid do whatever they want. Those are not sustainable, nor are they emotionally supportive. I do not care what your child is, there is a way to authoritative, gentle parent them. Permissive parenting looks like asking them 5 times, please get down, please don't do that, please, I said don't do that, are you listening? Unacceptable. Authoritarian is, if you don't stop that right now, you are getting a smack. Also unacceptable because you come across as irrational and unpredictable, and therefore your child will learn not to trust you. Authoritative parenting, real simple. Compassion with boundaries. Hey, what you're doing is unsafe. You can either get off yourself or I will come and get you off. Yes, I can see what you want to do. We can find a safer way to do that. It will require parents to problem solve and emotionally regulate.
I don't know. I feel like if you've got this parenting strategy and people are practicing it incorrectly, then that means that your instructions and your guidance was clearly not very clear. Your instructions were unclear. So people don't fully understand the assignment. And is that the fault of them or the fault of you for not providing clear, easy to follow instructions? You know? Because it just kind of feels like if you've got so many parents who are trying to practice gentle parenting and they're all having the same problem, then there's quite clearly a problem going on there. And if you're just going to put it down to you're just not doing it correctly, then the question then becomes, why are there so many of them that are misinformed? Because if in your opinion there's just so many of them who are not practicing it correctly, then quite clearly there's a misinformation problem that you have with gentle parenting that needs to be resolved. Perhaps it's the name that's misleading, you know, gentle parenting. I mean, most people don't think... There goes my baby. Apologies for the cute little baby squeals in the background. My daughter is having a field day with her father by the sounds of things. But yeah, but as I was saying, perhaps it's because of the name. You know, maybe gentle parenting was maybe not the best name to choose, because when you think of gentle, you don't really think of things like boundary setting and being stern and firm. You know, you kind of think of like soft. When I think of gentle, I think of soft. And so maybe that's why some people have misinterpreted it as being permissive parenting. Maybe. I don't know. Because I have seen some people try and argue that gentle parenting is exactly the same as authoritative parenting, in which case then my question is, if it's exactly the same, then why does it have a different name? Because if you're going to rename something, it kind of implies that there are some differences. So I did try and have a look into it, and when I looked into it, apparently there are some differences between gentle parenting and authoritative parenting, or authoritative parenting. And what came up is that gentle parenting has more of an emphasis on emotional validation, empathy, and building a strong relationship through open communication, as well as de-emphasizing traditional punishments like timeouts. So it's quite clearly not the same. And I can also understand if gentle parenting is supposed to have this really strong emphasis on emotional validation, and it's also supposed to not have traditional punishments like timeouts and stuff like that, I can completely understand why some parents would end up doing permissive parenting, even if they're not necessarily trying to, because it does seem to me anyway that gentle parenting stigmatizes traditional punishment methods, but doesn't really give you productive alternatives, aside from, you know, focusing on your child's emotional validation and focusing on, you know, communicating with them, etc. Like that, you don't really offer anything that is just as practical as the traditional methods, but you also stigmatize the traditional methods. So I can see like how a lot of parents might end up in a situation where they don't really know what they're doing, and then they kind of end up falling into permissive parenting because they don't really know. They know they're not supposed to do the traditional punishment methods, but they also don't know what to replace them with. But overall, I think that many young parents are dealing with multiple issues at once. The first is trying to navigate raising a child in a world that no one could truly prepare them for, because technology has advanced so quickly and changed the world in so many ways, which would impact the way that they raise their children. Because new parental concerns have risen from these changes, I also think parents today have access to way too much information. There is far too much contradictory information about what's good for your child or terrible for your child, and for some of them, they are determined to not repeat the mistakes of their parents. They're trying really hard to try and avoid their child experiencing these negative experiences or negative emotions. And so in their search for the best parenting styles to accomplish that, gentle parenting is one of the ones that pops up the most, because it's seen as this new innovative way to accomplish all of that, and so many are trying it, and unfortunately not all of them are able to stick to it. Because I guess for many parents, it hasn't really delivered the results that they hoped for or they thought they were going to have, and so they're now ditching it and going back to the old school methods of parenting, because for some of them that's actually been found to be more effective. I saw this woman in one of the documentaries I watched for this video saying that, you know, sometimes the old school methods are just more effective. You know, sometimes raising your voice just works.
Never raise your voice, never lose your patience, meet every need of your child, and be consistent always. What do you think is the impact?
I think it's just, really contributing to this overall standard of unrealistic expectations being placed on all of us, and unrealistic expectations being placed on our kids to like always, stay under control, or like we're not robots. Like we have to be able to experience a whole range of human emotion. I completely lost it this morning with my kids because I asked them 10 times to get their shoes on and nobody did, until I decided to absolutely go beast mode Batman voice on them, and that's what actually worked. It's like, that's normal. That happens.
And like I said, I don't think the old school methods are always inherently bad. I think it really, a lot of them just comes down to how they're applied and how much they're used. I think that anything can be overdone to the point where it does end up becoming abusive or become damaging to a child. But I think as long as, as parents, that we are responsible and we're mindful of how we apply these methods, then I think that we might be okay. No promises. I'm trying to figure this out just as much as you are, okay? But I'm just hoping we'll be okay. Because I don't think that children benefit either from their parents trying really hard to create them a life where there's absolutely no friction at all, where they never have to experience being told off or having to experience a negative emotion. Or because I think that's also another problem as well, is that parents think that because something makes a child cry, it's automatically bad. But you've also got to understand that children are emotionally immature, and so sometimes they are going to cry because you've taken away something that they want. But that doesn't mean they're going to die, you know. Now, personally, I don't think it's good to dismiss your child's emotions either. However, I don't think that we can actually successfully try to remove all of the friction from their lives and try to remove any opportunity for them to experience negative emotions. And I don't think that actually prepares them for the real world either, because the real world is not going to do that for them. The real world is not going to care that much about how they feel about most things, to be honest. And then how are they going to cope with that when they didn't have any prior preparation for how to deal with these conflicts? And maybe that's why now we're seeing some adults or young adults who just don't know how to handle hearing the word no, or don't know how to handle conflict, or don't know how to handle not getting their own way, because unfortunately they never got practice with that in the home. And so now they go out into the real world expecting the rest of the world to say yes to them for everything they want, like their parents did, and having meltdowns when that doesn't happen. That's just my theory though. I'm not claiming that's a fact, but it's a theory as to why maybe we have some of the issues that we have with some young adults today. But that's all for this video though. I would like to know what your thoughts are. What do you think about the fact that many young parents are now ditching gentle parenting? Do you think that this is a positive move, or are you part of the group of people who think that actually they've just been practicing it incorrectly and gentle parenting is actually a really good thing? I don't know. I would be curious to know what your general thoughts are on gentle parenting, so do let me know what you think in the comments. If you found this video interesting, you may as well like and subscribe. Thank you so much for giving me your time today. I will see you in my next video.